All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to get started. Welcome to our new session for this afternoon, run by the Center for Space Commerce and Finance, and this session in particular is sponsored by Heinleins Prize Trust. It's called Farmer in the Sky. Now, you may ask yourself why we're doing a session about Farmer in the Sky at it's supposed to be a business track. We're doing it a little different than they've done it in, say, the Mars settlement or the lunar settlement tracks. There's a lot of science and engineering and a lot of geekiness and arm waving, and you'll see some of that here as well. But we're going to focus on us a little more is how flexible systems might be for use both terrestrially and in places like the Moon, Mars, and beyond. We're going to talk about potential commercialization of some of the technologies that are being developed and how that will also help feed people right here and out there. In way of introduction of our, here's what we have today. We have a keynote speaker followed by 4 other speakers. There'll be 2 speakers for about 20 minutes each. After the keynote, we'll have to take a very short break, and then we have 2 more speakers. And at the end of that, we still have about 30 minutes left in the day. We're all going to gather at this nice table here and have a lot of give and take with the audience and anybody who has a question. And we'll have I think it's going to be a fun day and a real thrilling conversation. By way of introduction of our keynote speaker today, I've been telling people this for a while. If you're out in the wilderness and that hungry grizzly bear is coming at you, that bear does not care about your credentials. And you shouldn't care about them either. All you care about is, do I have the skill to get out of this sticky situation and live? And this is what's going to be facing us more often than not as we go out to settle the planets and the stars. If your oxygen generator quit and you don't have the engineering skill, it doesn't matter if you have a PhD, you die. And these kinds of things are going to happen. And that's really by way of introduction, because our keynote speaker today is one of those people that in a bad situation you want to have your back. While he's very skilled in an academic way, he has credentials in space science and in management. He has spent several years now designing and building regenerative systems for feeding people in a sustainable way, starting with a small family level and then scaling up from there. A lot of this was inspired in many ways by the recent film, The Martian. Now I know as far as my own background is concerned, I mean, if I was stuck in that situation and I'm the IT guy, well, I better still know how to do something, how to grow potatoes and other things to stay alive until help can come. So having someone with multidisciplinary skills is going to be very, very important as we go out and settle the planet. In his day job, he works for a Boeing subsidiary in the Pacific Northwest. He and his wife have spent their own money building what he's about to show you today. And I think it's an inspirational story to tell, and I wanted to make sure. Once I saw this man's YouTube channel, I knew I had to bring it down here and speak to you all today. So please welcome someone who refers to himself as the real Martian, Jeff Raymond.
Good afternoon, everybody. Really appreciate you taking the time to come to this session. I know there's so many other sessions that are out there that you could choose to go to. It's been a pretty good conference so It's interesting, in 2004, I used to work about 2 blocks from here at the Space and Missile Systems Center. I was in the Air Force, and that's where my career started. Remember when I got there, we were, the big challenge was the baby boom retirement that was coming. And we were spending a lot of time going, how are we going to get younger folks into space, the space industry? And as I walk around here, I've seen that same problem start to manifest itself. I see quite a few folks who are either retired or ready to retire, and then I see high schoolers as the major populations, and there's not too many of us in between. So I'm hoping that what I can share today will actually help inspire some other folks just like me who have a history in space, but that maybe aren't fully engaged in it yet through whatever circumstances met their life. So as we get started, let me see if I can't set the stage for our conversation here specifically today. I didn't know about Farmer in the Sky until this conference, so I had to go out and get the Audible book and listen to it because I have no time to actually go read. I'm too busy doing everything else that I have. But essentially, if you haven't read it, it is a kid's book, but man, it's a really good book, very ahead of its time. The Earth has become overpopulated, and the government has started to ration foods globally. And they're actually looking for people to volunteer or become candidates to go help colonize one of Jupiter's moons, Ganymede. Now, it was published in 1950, but it was kind of ahead of its time. It was talking about problems that maybe we're going to be starting to face today, or at least some of the problems. Like technology not working. Let's see here. Earth today, absolutely beautiful. It's an amazing planet, the cradle of civilization as far as we know, and our species has now expanded to pretty much every corner of it, and we can survive in almost any environment, thanks to technology and our natural determination. But as we've expanded, I think most people know, or you may not, that a little storm has been brewing. The date of 2050, as we were talking right before this, is starting to show up in more and more academic papers. For me, and where I'm coming from, within the next 32 years, which means I will still be alive, the population of the planet will balloon to 9.5 billion people. That's a lot of people, but it's a big number, and big numbers are hard to understand, so let's try to make it real. If you were to take those people, and they're all average height like me, and you're to have them stand on each other's shoulders, they could go from the Earth to the Moon 43 times. But that still doesn't make too much sense, so let's make it more real. If you were to put all those people into a Boeing 777, like what we did when we flew down here, you could go, and you were to get on that plane when you were first born. By the time you got off the plane after you did that trip 43 times, you would be 48 years old. That is a whole lot of people that are starting to show up on our little blue dot. It is as if trying to just feed that many people wasn't a problem. NASA's Gravity Recovery and Climate Experiment found that almost 2/3 of the underground aquifers on the planet are now, right now today, emptying faster than they can be filled. But it's more real than that. Here in California, in fact, NASA did another study using radar. They found that California, in some spots, is actually sinking up to 2 inches just in the last few years because of all the water that we're pumping out for our agriculture. Now, I've had lots of people comment regarding this, that this is kind of shaking the tree a little bit because there's so much water everywhere. But what we're talking about is affordable, clean water that you don't have to be rich in order to go have. So by not being able to drill for water or it's all gone, we have a major problem agriculturally across the planet. The bottom line is we're already taxing our natural water reserves here on Earth. But that's not enough. According to the FAO report titled How to Feed the World 2050, we need to increase agricultural output right here on Earth by 70%. The best we can do is 20. Now, if you look at all the arable land, let's say you don't trust that report, you go do your own math, I did. The bottom line is we don't have enough arable land to actually grow all the food that we need to, and there's not enough water to do it even if we had to. So maybe the world of Farmer in the Sky isn't so far away after all. If we truly want to provide a more hopeful future for our children, we have to change the way we think about agriculture here today, right now. The centralized, large farms, agricultural programs that we have today will not work in the future. They're not secure. They're easily destabilized. If you look at all the food contamination that's happened and been in the news recently, we know that large farms, when they go bad, you impact hundreds of thousands of people. We need to decentralize how we do farming. This doesn't sound very real Martian-ish, but let me step back and talk to you about why I'm up here. Okay, this is an engineering conference, and one of the rules about presenting is that you're not allowed to use equations. That is a very bad no-no, but you're all engineers and science types, so I figured we can give me a pass on that one today. It's obviously much more qualitative than it is quantitative, but let's roll through this a little bit. I am an aerospace engineer by degree. I graduated from Embry-Riddle over in Prescott, not too far away. And I believe that as engineers, we have a responsibility to use our knowledge to help people throughout the planet. If you were to look at my life and all the things that I've done, I've been a firefighter. I love saving people's lives. I've been in the Air Force. I served. I've gone to Baghdad. Experience is one of the things that if you look at, I really believe in helping people. It's part of who I am. Through a series of what I will call divine interventions, my primary plan to be an astronaut was derailed. I have a right bundle branch block in my heart. I was going up for physicals to submit my package while in the Air Force, and you can't compete with the world's greatest if you're not great yourself. So I ended up having to leave the Air Force, not because I wanted to, but because it was put on my heart very strongly that I needed to go home. I didn't know why. And when so I left the Air Force. I didn't have a job. I loved the Air Force. I didn't want to leave. It was against my plan to do that. So they call my dad and I the clones. We think the same. We act the same. We look the same, with the exception I have a lot less hair than he does. And he was a real cowboy. He was a mountain man. And he was a leader. He was a mentor, a great friend. And he had a work ethic second to no one. Now, I had to tell you that to tell you this. 6 months after I left the Air Force, my dad has never smoked, he's never had asbestos in his lungs, and he was diagnosed with terminal lung cancer. 6 months after that, he was gone. He was 65 years old, and he was just a few months away from retirement. And why does that matter in context of this slide? It's pretty motivating when you truly see that life will end, that it's right there, and that it's too short to sit on your laurels and not do something, to not take risk, to not put yourself out there, and to not try. Faith. My wife and I are Christians. Every night I was praying, God, thank you for this food. Every night, always giving thanks. And then I'd also add, and please help provide food to those who don't have any. And I do this for years. And one night, I prayed, same thing, and all of a sudden I hear, well, why don't you do something about it? I felt like I just got whacked up alongside the head. I've been praying all these times to, please help provide food, and here I am getting questioned. So it made me wonder, it made me sit back and think, do I believe? Do I believe in what I believe? And do I believe in it so much that I'm willing to do something about it? The last piece of the equation. In my day job, as mentioned, I work for In Situ, which is a subsidiary of the Boeing company. We make some of the unmanned aerial systems that you might have heard about on the news. I'm a program manager. I oversee new product development, so all the new stuff I get to take care of. It's a great job. And in that job, I've been recognized as someone who actually gets things done. I take ideas and I turn them into reality. That's who I am. So I've also been recognized as being a human punching bag. Because if you're a program manager, you know that you have to have a certain amount of grit to get in there and deal with getting funding and keeping your programs funded. And basically everyone tells you it can't be done and everyone's fighting you. So you're kind of a punching bag, but punching bag doesn't sound as good as John Wayne's grit. So I've also been told that I have grit, and I like that one better, so I'm going to do the grit thing today. But if you add that all up, what does it really mean? Well, I'm sure since it is a qualitative study and not quantitative, that we can argue this too, we're blue in the face or red in the face if we're going to Mars. But I'm choosing today that say that it equals hope. If you have an individual, any individual, not me in particular, and they have all these things that are part of them, then they can create a more hopeful future for all of us. To date, I have spent over 9 years, 7 with my wife who is here with me today, researching, planning, and developing a solution to help with the global problem that I spoke about. My wife and I are just two normal people. I have a master's in organizational leadership and bachelor's in aerospace engineering. I'm not a super PhD. I don't own a great company. I'm not a billionaire. I go to work every day, and everything I'm about to show you, I do on the weekends and at night and before I go to work. We are just normal folks trying to make a difference. and I hope that our journey can help inspire others to do the same. We believe in what we're doing so much. We have so much faith and hope in it that we mortgaged our home, we cashed out retirement, and we have invested $250,000 of our own money to show you what we did here today. We believe in what we're doing. On the screen behind me, you'll see a list of our high-level system requirements. These are the things that need to change. Now, I'm not going to go through each one of them for you, but for the folks in the back, and just to help summarize it, essentially we need to do more with less. We have to use less water to do it. We can't pollute while we're doing it. We have to make it repeatable and affordable so others can do it. And we have to sustainably, try to say that one, produce energy so it can be done. So this isn't just a hack job. I started off using SysML, and I modeled a series of use cases to figure out all the things that needed to be done to help address this particular problem. Then, looking at those requirements, I decomposed them like any good systems engineer would do, and try to figure out the system architecture, which is the next thing coming up. A nice block diagram. You can't have a good design without a block diagram, but you also need to know how all those diagrams interface with each other, passing things back and forth throughout the entire system. Took me quite a while, a year's worth of design to do all that. I also created a simulation on my own here, looking at all the different components of the system and figuring out how everything would flow to verify the solution. Thermodynamic analysis, it's been years since I've done any of this. I forgot how to do an integral, so thank God I kept all my books. I actually chose numerical analysis here, so I'm looking at solar input by the minute, historical temperatures by the minute for my latitude, and then doing calculations by the minute for all heat transfer throughout the system. The cool thing was, by the time this was all done, I actually got within 1 degree Fahrenheit of actual. So I thought that was pretty cool. The initial design that I had for the system was fairly large. The primary driver in it, those big green tanks, where we were going to use algae for fuel. That was pretty popular in my research. And the performance analysis I showed, that's not going to work. The main thing that's blocking algae from being a sustainable and commercially viable source of fuel is cracking the cell membrane. And whether you're using ultrasound or anything else to get in there, the amount of energy it takes to crack it is a negative energy equation. So you're losing more than what you gain on that one. So we had to change the game plan on that. We started off small. We decided to do an experiment in our office at home. One way to do more with less is to not have to use dirt. And aquaponics is a very popular method of an evolved hydroponics, essentially, of using fish waste and bacteria to generate the nutrients you need so you don't have to have all the salts and all the liquids that come with your hydroponic systems. And the good news about aquaponics is, just like hydroponics, it uses 90% less water than traditional agriculture. Fish are a big deal. Managing fish waste, whether it's big like the one that you're going to see or small like this, it's a major problem. And also fish breeding, how to get them to reproduce sustainably. Have you ever had a garden or a dog or a cat or kids? You have to tend the garden, you have to change the litter, you have to take the dog for a walk, and you have to spend an inordinate amount of time with your kids taking them from place to place. Time is the one thing that we don't have enough of and we can't create more of for certain. So automation was a key piece of what we had to go through and implement. You could be married to a food production system, and that's one of the barriers to redistribution of the agricultural support infrastructure we have today. Environmental control is huge. We had lots of evaporation from the system, and recapturing that is very important. Also, artificial lighting. In our solutions, LEDs do appear to be the most commercially viable solution right now, especially when you look at the amount of energy that it takes to light them and how we can specify what spectrum of light is available for plants. Fish need food just like we need food. So in order to help feed the fish in the aquaponic system, we need a way to actually help support them. Now the good news is that there's a lot of fish out there that can survive on algae. So you'd think that growing algae would be a really, really easy thing to do since it proliferates everywhere where you don't want it. However, this is exactly false. It is very hard to do in a controlled environment with affordable tools and capabilities for normal, everyday people. We built our own photobioreactor here in our nice fancy 5-gallon bucket, with rotating LEDs inside. The challenge that I face is that there was too much light. I actually overfed them and burned the algae and nuked them all. They were all nice and white by the time it was done, and no matter how many times I re-inoculated the system, I couldn't keep them going. So that is a big challenge, and when I was doing this, I started thinking this might be a little bit harder than what I imagined. So given my background, kind of the mountain man father and the space cowboy type of side of me, I guess is a good way to say it, I was able to look at this problem slightly differently perhaps than others, is looking at traditional agricultural methods, but let's bring some space into it. Let's look at automation, let's look at technology and see how it can help us. But not in the crazy, I want to go nuts with all this cool technology, but in a way that actually really does help us. And I tried to find a place or someone in 5 years of research, which is completely not exhaustive, but I spent a lot of time reading papers. I haven't found anyone who's done quite what we're doing, but I welcome anyone to point me in the direction of someone who has. Our solution has two major foundations: growing food using aquaponics and generating reliable power using anaerobic digestion. The anaerobic digester is a process by which we use bacteria to break down organic waste. Now, this has two byproducts. The first byproduct is an organic liquid fertilizer known as digestate. The second is methane, or biogas. That organic digestate can be used to repopulate or recycle nutrients in the system, depending on what you're putting in the digester. So that helps bring our micronutrients back in and recycle everything. The methane can be used to help power and heat the system. Our system has 6 major inputs, 7 if you include air, but I haven't shown that on the slide. We can take dirty water, assuming it's safe for fish, and use that in our system. We can also consume more CO2 than what we produce. In addition to that, I'm summarizing the slide here, but in addition to that, it comes with its own organic waste dump. You can sit there and shove as much stuff in it as you want, and the more you put into it, the more gas and digestate you get back out. Environmental control system. Just like in the small experiment, we need one here. This is important for temperature, lighting, and humidity. The major benefit of this system is when you go through water recapturing, you actually get a nice clean type of water back that you could actually drink. Automation, again, is hugely important for us to save time with the system and control all of these things. The final piece of the system is the facility, and this is one of the actually more challenging pieces, which you need to have in order to keep everything safe. So what do you get? Clean water, fresh fruits and vegetables. You get to have protein in the form of fish, fuel for your vehicles, and electricity. One thing that I think separates the work that we're doing from others in this area is that this isn't an experiment. We actually intend to live off of this thing, and we actually intend to get our money back. Our first prototype is named Habitat 1, or HAB1 for short. It can sustain 4 families of 4 adults. That's the calorie consumption that I was using to actually generate the square footage required. It's huge, 80 feet long by 40 feet wide by 22 feet tall at the center line. Some of the key things that we had to consider when putting this up is the orientation to the sun. We can't turn our back on the fact that the sun has the most amount of power anywhere, and we really have to use it, no matter how much we want to. And strength was another thing. That's why it's not a normal greenhouse. We live in a place up in Washington where we're at 2,400 feet, and we live on a road called Snowed In. When it snows, it actually snows all the way up, snow piles all the way up to the elbow of the building. We needed a structure that could actually handle that, and that's why we needed such a steep pitch roof, as well as the high vertical growing lanes inside. As we learned in our experiment, environmental control is very important. It really helps keep everything nice and happy. Bringing in fresh CO2 is important. Heaters in the winter, coolers in the fans and cooling in the summer. Insulation to help make sure that we keep a more constant and energy efficient temperature. Humidity and condensation control, those are really big ones. You'll notice a little asterisk on the propane heater and the propane supply. Unfortunately, I haven't got the digester fully operational, and we're going to talk about that. So right now, this building is partially operational, but we have to use propane, and in the future, I want to switch us off of that and back into biogas per the original design. We have 4 grow lanes in the building. Each one of them is roughly 50 feet long, each with multiple shelves on them. We need this so we can take advantage of the vertical growing space so that we can actually help solve this problem. We're just now learning how to go vertical. There are plenty of challenges with it. If you want to just dump a bunch of money and technology into it, you can have lights all over the place. But this building has 40 amps. So we have to do all this with 40 amps. Now, if you remember that scene from Apollo 13 where they're like, okay, here we are, we got to start at the LEM. If this thing pings over this, they all die. That's like us. When it pings over the breaker, we don't die. The breaker flips. And I have to run up to the house and I have to flip the breaker. But we have to do this on low amounts of energy. So we are running 120 volts and 14 amps. Or I'm sorry, 40 amps is the max that we can run out here. So it's a little bit limited. We also have put the fish tanks in the ground. You'll notice that. The fish tanks are in the ground for two reasons. One, if we put them above ground like traditional aquaponics, you are wasting valuable grow space. And that's part of the problem that we have. Remember that 70% increase? We got to go better than 2 square feet of land for every one. So we put the fish tanks down below. That creates its own challenges, but it also helps us thermodynamically and help conserve energy. We don't have to use as much heat to warm them in the winter or as much energy to cool them in the summer. The digester. The digester is not my design. I purchased this one from Puqin. They're one of the folks out of China who appear to be kind of distributing these globally right now, mostly in non-first world countries. You really can't depend on any source of power that's solar or wind. You just can't do it. And I have a great picture that'll, I hope, clearly illustrate the reason why. And lacking available and affordable nuclear power, I have to go with something that I can afford and that I can depend on, and that's organic waste. So it consists of a stomach, which is in the top left, and a neck, which is in the middle, and then 2 additional necks, which are storage tanks and a digestate storage tank as well. Inside of it, I've wrapped PEX tubing, and I can pump warm water or warm heating solution down there through those tubes to help heat it and cool it, if I needed to. It is 12 feet in diameter and 12 feet into the ground. We have 16.5 kilowatts of solar power. That's our primary source of power right now, but I'm certainly hoping that we can switch it over to the biogas power as per the original design. This is the generator that could actually power the system, and I have had it running off the digester, but the loading challenges that I'll get to make it hard to keep it going. The system does generate all the power that we need. It generates all the power for the building as well as enough power for our home, and in the nice summer months we actually generate excess power, and using net metering we can use the grid as our battery. So a few weeks ago I'm on an airplane flying down here for my day job, and I'm going to speak to the FAA, which is a story I shared earlier. That was a challenge in itself. It was pretty warm at home. It was in the 80s and 90s. And I felt the need to check on the system. So I get my Wi-Fi and connect to the Wi-Fi on the airplane, which I'm very thankful they finally got Wi-Fi on airplanes. And I dial up the system. I go to my static IP, I put my password in, and I'm in the system. I'm looking at my system logs, I'm figuring out if everything's working the way it's supposed to, and I have full remote control over the system. I can see all my lights, which ones are working, which ones aren't working, and the grow lanes, which valves are going, and I can see the temperature of everything and other sensors that I have. Now, in order to do that, it required me to learn 7 new software languages. So for any of the kids that are going up, learn software. Learn lots and lots of software. One is not enough. PHP, JavaScript, CSS, MySQL, all of them were all very important in order to make this thing work. But the good news is we have a full remote control of the system, and I'm going to have a lot of fun with this one. So let's be real clear. I'm not a super genius. I don't declare to be Tony Stark or anything like that, and I certainly don't have enough money to prove or do anything like he could anyway. I am not perfect. In fact, I'm about as far away from it that you can get. I've made wrong calculations. I've missed calculations, and saying that to a group of people who have NASA shirts on and probably have degrees far higher than me takes a little bit of grit to do. I've rushed items into place that should have been tested more, and things that should have been thought through more. And in some cases, my ideas have been flat out wrong. But what separates us from, I think, other people is that while others are busy thinking, we're busy doing. And that has a lot of credit to it, because you can only think so long until you eventually need to put the thinking aside and you need to roll your sleeves up and get in there and get stuff done. And that's what we've been doing. The good news is, as we put everything up on YouTube, everything that I make a mistake on, somebody else can stand on our shoulders and not make that same mistake. So let's talk about mistakes. Top left-hand corner. Something should probably not look right to you in that one if you can see it, but if you can't, it's a thing that should be straight up like that, and it's a little bit like that. In fact, it's 35 degrees off of its center line. That's our second grow lane that I built. You'll notice it's tilting way too far to one side. I actually just got done building the thing. I was standing over here when the ground gave way. My foundation sucked. I have a tractor here, a tractor here, and a truck back there, all with chains on it to hold it in place. This is at the end of the day. I had already spent all day out here. I usually start about 7 or 8 in the morning on a weekend, and I work. There are, each of these beds are filled with lava rock up on the top and on the bottom, and the foundation had given away down here. When this happened, I stepped back and I started laughing. I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. This really sucks. I don't know how I'm gonna fix this, which is just kind of like in The Martian. If you read that book, there's a lot of those situations. And in fact, how they start the book off is pretty much how I felt right at this point. Took me 12 hours, and I worked straight through the night because this one's safety. This is a major safety concern here. And I got it righted. But by the time I was done, I had to use sledgehammers and cribbing and jacks, multiple tons of jacks. My arm stopped working, literally stopped working. I sweat so much and lack of potassium. My arm cramped up. I literally had to like pull it down. Chest muscle was done. It was sometime in dark early morning when I finished. So if you want to talk about what it takes to really deal with problems, the grizzly bear is chasing you, I could give you lots more stories like that one. But to keep things moving along here, if you've ever had to put a building up like this, you should probably know that you need to insulate the ground. It's very important. If you don't do that, you're going to end up looking like that guy right there, which is what I did after I had to dig up everything and put down insulation around the side of what's known as a Swedish skirt. You may also want to make sure that you consult a civil engineer, because I'm an aerospace engineer, damn it, and I am not a civil engineer. And there are many things that those folks know that I don't, like how to make sure you get proper drainage. I thought everything needed to be perfectly flat, so I got my laser out and I made a perfectly flat pad. You need a crown. You need to have water rolling off. It's very important. Now, on Mars and Moon, that's maybe flat will be better, so maybe I'll be better at that part of it there. Environmental control. Okay, so we put up this insulation. The building wasn't meant for it. We actually converted this normal fabric building into a passive solar greenhouse configuration. So the south side is completely open for the sun. The north side is insulated. But since it wasn't really built for it and the insulation I chose, it doesn't seal all the way, and that's what you're seeing there in red. What that means is warm, moist air gets up the top, it hits that cool fabric, and physics takes over and you get condensation. So that's a challenge because that can create mold and fungus. And of course, that's el batto. We don't want those things. So we need to deal with that. Now, we think we have. We've put in dehumidifiers to help reduce the amount of humidity in the building. And that seems to have really got it under control, but you need to make sure you stay on top of that. In addition, when we first put this building up, we had an all-white cover to help reflect some of the heat and cool in the summertime. But what that did is it reduced the solar energy by so much that the amount of electricity required to keep all the lights going was in excess of the 40 amps that we had. So we had to replace that cover with a custom cover and go to half clear and half white. That means in the winter, it's beautiful in there, it's perfect. You can walk around in 70 degrees. And then in the summer, it's 100 degrees if you don't have good environmental control. So shading without covering up things too much is very important. Now, if I were to summarize the experiences with this, I would say that environmental control could be known as whack-a-mole. As soon as you deal with one problem, another one pops up. And when you deal with that one, 2 more problems pop up. And it doesn't seem like you can ever get to the end of it. You're always doing a whack-a-mole game. You know, this is the old carnival game. Whack, whack. They all just keep popping up. It's kind of like that. Fish waste is a big deal. Getting up out of since we put the tanks down in the ground, which is economical and what we want to do for the food, what we now have is a challenge with all the fish waste collecting on the bottom. Now, we don't have a very high density system, so this isn't a big deal, but it will start to be. We need to get that waste up, and how to do that economically is a challenge. I have a little video here to talk about one of our other challenges that we have. Good evening, Mission Control. Well, just got done with a long day at the normal job, and tonight we get to catch up with some stuff around here. So let me tell you what I've been up to. Well, yesterday was a really tough day for me. I spent all day Saturday and Sunday installing the new valves here. This is the inlet valve for filling the grow bed, and then underneath the tank I actually have the outlet valve. Now this valve here is normally closed, meaning that unless electricity is sent to it, it will remain closed. So if power goes out, this thing closes. And then the valve on the bottom, which is right underneath here, it's normally open, meaning that if the power goes out, that valve opens. Now the reason for that, let's see here, I'm going to back up. In previous video I gave you my thoughts on the Bell siphon valves. Those are the valve systems that we used originally.
After a long day at work, I'm not as excited as I am right now, so a little bit more tired that day.
Is that the water fills up and then it gets to the top of a standpipe inside, which is surrounded by another tube, and the water goes over the standpipe, goes straight through the drain, and then that action sucks the air down and creates a siphon, draining the bed very quickly and keeping from having standing water in the bed. Now I spent a lot of time troubleshooting that Bell siphon and trying to get it really dialed in, and finally decided that it's just not for a commercial level activity like what we're trying to do. It's really just not worth your time. Second to the time issue is that the Bell siphons required manual changing of the height, meaning you'd have to come out here and you'd actually have to change the height of the standpipe. Now that's important because not all your plants need the same amount of water. So if you were to constantly be bringing water all the way up to the top where the standpipe is at, or in here somewhere where the standpipe is at, you'd actually be flooding some of your plants.
So controlling the water is very important, and as we learned, if you just flood everything like in normal aquaponics, which are usually generated to go after leafy green vegetables, but if you really want to do something else, you've got to really watch your water level. So what we're learning here is that you have to use these control valves if you're going to go with a design like this in order to change that water level commensurate with where the roots are at in the vegetable growth stage. So for seeds, you want that water level to go very high, but not too high, because then you'll expose it to light, and light will create algae. So there's a balancing act that you have to have in there. We're actually right now collecting a bunch of data as far as when we planted and when we harvested things, so that we can actually write an app for each of the different types of plants, so that we can control that water level and really precisely deliver the amount of water needed for each one. Dissolved oxygen is also another important thing to consider, since you do have fish and they do need air to survive. We found that fish really do die if you starve them of oxygen. Who knew? I mean, who knew? So one day the power went out, and didn't have a monitor on the system, and we walk out there and there's a bunch of fish dead. The good news is the fish taste great. Bad news is the fish died. So the reason they died is because the power went out. But what we've also learned is when we switch to the valve system and we're now alternating, the amount of water that each bed gets, the original design was using gravity. It was just using the premise of fill the bed, drain the bed, the height above the bed from where the tank is at. That distance would create enough energy so that you can actually disturb the water and add the oxygen to it. It's a very low electrical needing system. But because we went over to these valves, we now need to essentially add aeration to the system. The digester. I've got another little video here on this one. It's got its own challenges.
A few weeks ago we had some faculty members from Washington State University come to our location. We did a nice walkthrough with them. It was really cool having them here. And we're going over all the different pieces of the system and walking through everything. And by far the thing that's most interesting, of course, is the digester, because that's kind of what we're doing differently than everybody else. People have greenhouses, people have aquaponics, hydroponics, they have indoor growing greenhouses and microgreens and all that. But people have solar panels as well. What we're trying to do is integrate solar, wind potentially, the digester, aquaponics, and the indoor growing and everything associated with that all together into one system with automation that is sustainable. And the key to our success is the digester, which is the area I'm standing on. The problem with the digester is loading it. And we come to find out with the folks' help from Wazoo that that's the same problem everybody else is having. And and all the research and everything I didn't find that, because, and Wazoo even talked about it, is a lot of people focus on the science of what happens inside of the digester
And these systems that are small-scale digesters, they focus their research on what's going on inside, and these small-scale ones are kind of like one-offs. So, you know, they load it, they seal it, they let it do its thing, they take all their measurements, do their experiments, and then they stop, unload it, do it again. But we're looking at a continuous feed system, and the problem is feeding it with material. So here is the inlet to the digester. At the very bottom of it has an 8-inch pipe. And that 8-inch pipe goes all the way down in the digester stomach, down to the very bottom. And this white pipe used to not be here. So let's talk about why it wasn't there before. The idea was that you'd come out here by its design, and you would load this section here with your manure and waste. And then as it gets waterlogged, it settles down to the bottom and goes into the digester. Well, the problem was, with our stuff, it all floated. The buoyancy of all those materials, the rinds, cores, grass clippings, especially the manure, all those things actually floated. So instead of having this stuff sink down to the bottom, what happened is it all just plugged up in here. And I actually got a toilet bowl plunger, and
I did. Toilet bowl plunge the digester. You ever done that? I have. The end actually broke off, so it's in the digester somewhere right now. So the digester, we really did find buoyancy of waste and waste handling. You know, major props to everyone who's dealing with that in the world. It is not insignificant. Whether it's here or off-world, that's going to be a challenge. And what we really did understand, what we learned from this, is that no matter what we do, shredding of waste, you do need to pre-process all your waste. Even if you have the leaves and the plants left over from your harvest, you can't just throw them in there. It's best for two reasons to grind them up. First, it allows more bacteria surface area, so you have more active surface area for the bacteria to get a hold of, which means you get more production for the gas and smaller leftovers. But also, it just makes it to where you can actually handle the material a lot easier and get it down into the stomach so it can do its job. Heating of the digester is also extremely critical, and that probably goes without saying, but it is an exothermic reaction when you do get it to the right temperature, but you got to get it to the right temperature. When this thing's hot, it farts a lot. I mean, it's a cow's stomach, so it's farting methane all the time. But when it's cold, it's pretty much worthless. It's not doing anything. It just sits there, and actually the material inside will start to crust over on you. So movement inside of the tank is very important. I actually installed these vacuum solar tubes as a low-energy way to heat the system. And it was really great. I actually put them in, and I got a delta T of about 2 degrees Fahrenheit, which is totally not good enough. This is another one of those I made a mistake and get it look like an idiot type of things. I calculated the volume of the tubes going throughout the entire tank, and what I forgot to do is deal with the heat transfer from the tubes to the giant heat sink known as a digester, which is pretty obvious, as well as the heat transfer from the digester to the ground around it. So because of that, my solar tubes are woefully inadequate, but they do heat a little bit, and I was very hopeful for it when I installed them this last winter because the sun was coming directly in, and I set this all up so it was perpendicular to the sun and everything, which leads to the second problem. That sun moves in the sky. So I need a dynamic system to be able to make sure that whatever I'm using passively is actually tracking the sun, which means lots of complexity, lots of electricity, and that's going to be a challenge. But I could also probably mount something up along the top of the building and gather energy there and bring it back down. But that is a problem. That sun moves. Can anyone guess what the lesson of this picture is? You cannot depend on solar no matter how much you want to. It is not a viable solution for long-term anything. It is great to have. We love having it. I'm very happy we have it. And it powers everything when it's not snowing. The problem isn't the slope. Believe it or not, you might be thinking, we'll just create a higher pitch, right? That's not the problem. The problem is what's in front of it. It's where everything goes. That's the problem. I came out here and there's videos on our YouTube. You could see I had people telling me, use a string, all the snow will come off. You know, it's put a tarp on it. You know, those all don't work. By the way, I tried them. One guy said, use a leaf blower, but I tried it. I had to look like an idiot because of his comment. So, okay, but that's not the problem. The problem is all the snow in front. Now, just imagine 3 months of a storm on Mars. Okay. Where you're going to need, I have a tractor, and I eventually gave up.
You just can't keep up with it. And that was just after a week of snow straight. So I know snow is different than dust, but there is this similar problem there. So I think this picture clearly explains why. Automation is a big deal. You really do need to have a build server, a live build server, before you deploy anything into an operational environment, and I just haven't learned how to build one yet. So that means I put a lot of software out there, and it doesn't work, and my system stops, and then I spend all night up until 2 in the morning trying to troubleshoot it. One of the key things I put in place was a system log. Another one of those, if you're a software engineer, you're probably laughing inside at me right now, like you're an idiot. How come you don't do that? That's common knowledge. But I'm not a software engineer, so I didn't know that. But also put in place a watchdog. And now a watchdog, for those who aren't familiar with it, is a piece of software that does exactly what it says. It's a watchdog. It watches things and it starts barking when things go wrong. So putting in place the watchdog to help troubleshoot the system it's probably actually one of the most important things that we actually had. Life is a very funny thing. When you don't want it, it shows up. When you do want it, it's really hard to find it. We found that air, light, and temperature are real bugaboos. They need to be just right, Goldilocks style, to get what you really want. If they aren't, then other undesirable life shows up, such as mites and thrips, mildew, fungus. These little itty-bitty black dots right there, that's a thrip. That thing is about the size of my thumb. So thumb, not a big thumb. You really have to keep track of how you're going to deal with organics when you're dealing with them. Unfortunately, it's not as predictable as inorganic stuff, but my body tends to like it. How about our journey? If you've ever done something this crazy, then you know exactly what I'm going to say next. But essentially, the idea of this bathtub curve is, hey, I've got a really good idea. Oh, this sucks a lot. Hey, this is a really great idea. We definitely felt this curve. In fact, as you can see, we're here right now. When you go through all this, if you're going to do anything like this, and I would say when people do go to the stars, they will be faced with this on a much more desperate scale than what we are. When you get to that pit of despair, you will be tested. You're going to figure out how committed you really are. You're going to figure out if you have the grit that it takes to get the job done. You're going to figure out if you can persevere or if you're just going to quit. You're going to figure out, while you watch everybody else having fun, enjoying their life, if the sacrifice that you put into it is worth it. You're going to figure out if you have faith that in the darkest of hours there is light at the end of the tunnel and this wasn't a complete waste of time. This was created by John Saddington. It's been going around on the internet lately, so I give all credit to him. I wish I could say it. We've certainly experienced it, and it's a key part of the journey. So I wake up each day wondering if I'm crazy, and I'm pretty sure the answer to that question is yes, you are. You're completely off your gourd. But besides that, you know, did I just waste $250,000 of my own money, of our own money, to do this? That's putting yourself out there. We have invested a lot. We expect this system to deliver a lot, and the good news is, it is. We've already stopped buying all the leafy greens from the store. Green beans, broccoli, cauliflower. The broccoli is doing so well, it's actually surpassed the vertical space that I've given it, so that's a defect that I have to address. Green onions, carrots, garlic, kiwi. Yes, we're growing kiwi in the northern latitudes. Not a big deal, not brand new, but we're doing it. That's cool. Cantaloupe, which is my family's favorite. Watermelon, strawberries, Walla Walla sweet onions, red and gold potatoes. We are not using our own poop like they did in The Martian. We're using fish poop instead. And corn. We actually have some ears of corn growing already in our system. They say knee-high by July. Well, it was May when I took this picture, and ours are almost as tall as I am. Beets and lavender. So my wife is a talented chef, and she'll tell you that, you know, food without flavor kind of sucks, and I will agree with that. So we decided to add a little bam to it. You got to have herbs in the system. So we got quite a few of those, and not to be outdone by herbs are fruits and almonds. So the grapefruit and the banana tree are actually doing the best right now. Mind you, remember how much snow we got? We're growing these things in the northern latitudes. So as part of this investment, my wife and I have actually started 2 organizations. The first one is G11 Engineering Incorporated, which is a 501c3 nonprofit. We are not intending to get rich on this idea. This is not a get-rich scheme. We actually really, truly believe in it, and we're trying to make a difference. G11 was set up as an engineering organization to actually build these things and go out and help get them out into the world. I will say this. I don't care how many people are in this area, it will take all of us to get this problem solved. The next one is the Raymond Ranch LLC, after my family's name, in honor of my dad, I would say. And there we're providing food to our local community to help pay for this system. We spoke earlier about a return on investment. Right now, the building is not only producing food for us to eat, but it's also producing food in the form of revenue that we sell as microgreens to local restaurants and grocery stores. The really good news is we're about 1 or 2 customers away from actually breaking even. So as far as the system being proven, this is a real deal. Appreciate that. Okay, so I would say that HAB1 is operational, but it's only IOC, initially operational. It's not FOC yet. We have about 10 major things that we need to take care of before it's complete. Of those 10, the ones shown in orange are really the critical path. Of those, the ones that are starred here, heat management, vertical growing, and digester loading, are the ones that are the most important. If we get those ones figured, when we get those ones figured out, everything else is going to fall into place. At least that's what we're hoping for. So, by implementing smaller distributed systems such as HAB1, we can help close that 70% gap. We can help feed this planet more. And again, it's going to take a lot more than just one organization to do this. We can increase food security by redistributing the food system and not having very large farms that when one thing goes wrong, everybody gets punished for it. And we can create a healthier and more hopeful future for our children. Now that I absolutely believe in. We have our proof of concept, and as you can see, it's basically working. Now we need to finish the work. We have a lot of defects to fix. We have a very large backlog of things that need to get fixed. And we need to optimize HAB1 so we can build HAB2. The idea of HAB2 is we want to get it down so we have 4 families of 4 in HAB1. We need to get it down to a single family of 4. That's our target where we want to go to. So we got to get a lot smaller. Similar to when you build electronics, you don't make the perfect thing right up front. You start off with a breadboard. So a breadboard is just basically, let's spread everything else out. I don't care how much space I take up. I just want to make sure functionally everything's there. So we breadboarded it. Now I'd like to put a team together like the one shown here, and we go in and we walk through the system, a real system, not a theoretical system, not a slideshow system, but a real functioning system that matters, that people live off of, and go and optimize it and build HAB2. As far as numbers go, we have put together our initial business case for this. It does close. I'm going to give you the summary version of this chart, which is essentially, if I'm working full-time on it, this is what it costs, and when you add all those people to it, that's what it costs. And the good news is that when you look at HAB1's cost, which is at $250,000, if you divide it by 4, because it's 4 families of 4, our material cost is actually very close to our unit material cost that we're actually going after to make it commercially viable here on Earth. So that whole thing, we're looking at the unit price there. I think compared to a NASA effort, that's probably a pretty good deal. So my neighbor, this whole TheRealMartian thing, he comes over, and he's a really big YouTube star. His channel just surpassed 1 million subscribers, and 2 years ago he came by. It was that horrible winter. It was snowing, below freezing outside, and he came and he asked, hey, can you give me a tour? I want to check this out. I said, yeah, sure, come on over. So he comes over, and he's walking through, and he's got his camera, and he peeks out behind, and he's like, you know what? This is really cool. You're kind of like the real Martian. I'm like, I'm an astronaut wannabe. Heck yeah, I am. That's pretty cool. But you know what, that cool story aside, TheRealMartian, it actually has more than that, because this has an interesting story. When I was working on this system, I started seeing how closed loop, we're getting closer and closer to closed loop, and that's when it hit me. This thing isn't just for Earth. It can scale to space. Now that's not what our mission was, but sure enough it can. Just for time, I'm not going to go through each one of these, but the way these charts are set up is things that we've done on the left which can scale almost 1-to-1, and challenges on the right. I think with the facilities, one of the biggest challenges that we have is transportation and deployment. And that's one of the key areas, is how to refactor everything so it's easily deployable. As far as environmental control, the weight of the equipment and power is really a major issue. And CO2 injection, your system can really start to take off and need more CO2 than what you can produce. And that's a problem that we face here on Earth. Many indoor growers actually supplement natural CO2 with containerized CO2 because of that. So CO2 injection is going to be a challenge. Now on Mars, I hear we have lots of it, so maybe it's easier there, but I hear the moon is lacking. Aquaponics. The key thing here is the female fish. Let's talk about sustainability. One hen, that's the female fish, is a hen, can have over 1,000 eggs, somewhere between 750 and 1,500 eggs per fish. Now, when we went to our local Fish and Wildlife Department and talked to them about what's the mortality rate, their mortality rate is less than 10% from egg to hatchling. So you can get really sustainable food with this if you're looking at fish as your primary source of nutrients for your plants. And as far as weight and volume to cost ratio, with seeds and eggs, that's a lot easier to transport than hundreds of kilograms of salts or liquids. The digester. Recycling waste is a huge deal, but here's the bottom line. People do put human waste into digesters. They do it throughout the planet. We don't do it here in the United States. It goes against all codes, and there's really obvious reasons for that. Food safety being a major issue here. Think of my dad, chemotherapy, right? It's in his body. He defecates. That goes in the digester. Unless you really do a lot of treatment on that waste like they would at a waste treatment plant, those chemicals are still there. How do you get rid of them? Solar's not going to work. Automation, latency is always going to be a challenge, and redundant systems are also very important, but our system is fully remote, capable, and I can truly connect to it anywhere on the planet. So back on Earth, we're planning on doing 4 prototypes. As you've seen, HAB 1 is coming along pretty nicely. We do have some challenges that we need to fix, but we'll tackle those. And personally, if I had my druthers, I'd say that HAB 5 should go to the space station, and HAB 6 should go to the moon, and HAB 7 should be on the first ship to Mars, and HABs 8, 9, and 10 should all be sitting there waiting for us to arrive. But that's pretty aggressive, and I know I'm dreaming. But here's the thing, maybe not. Here's what I mean. At this conference, I think one of the coolest things that I've seen and what I appreciate are the kids. Now those kids, they're amazing. They have unconstrained ideas. It's been extremely joyful to see in this conference their presentations. I've been in the aerospace industry for almost 20 years now. These kids, they haven't been tainted by our politics, our titles, our corporate ladders, and our social norms. They are truly just being creative and helping solve problems. Problem with aerospace, why we don't have enough young people in it, is because we have those other issues, and I think everyone knows that. I'm also hopeful what my wife and I have done will help inspire kids just like the ones that I've seen here. I hope it will take normal people like us, and it will show them that if you're willing to take a risk, you can make a difference. You can get out there and actually help people go to space. You can learn things that will contribute. And I think when we all realize that it really does take a village to solve our real problems, that we will make a big difference. If you're interested in observing what we've done, it's pretty nuts. You can go to our website. There's 2 of them. TheRealMartian.com will redirect you to us on YouTube. You can also follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Later in this year, I'm actually going to be doing what we call the Real Martian Challenge. You can't have a space mission without a space patch, so we got those put together. And the idea of the Real Martian Challenge 2018 is actually live off the system fully. That's me sleeping out there for 3 days. I heard a speech yesterday. Someone's going to be doing that in Hawaii for 2. So we're going to be doing it for 3 on our own. That's going to be pretty exciting to see. I really appreciate you guys letting me come up here and be a keynote speaker today. It is actually a very big honor to come back in and give you guys this type of presentation, knowing that I started my whole aerospace career just down the road at SMC. I truly have hope in the solution. I think that everybody working in this area, as we continue to move forward in it, will help people not just here on Earth, but someday beyond. I actually believe that what we're doing will help provide food to local communities around the world, as well as hopefully someday off of it. I really appreciate your time, and I know we're tight on time, so whatever questions you allow me, Thomas, I'd be happy to entertain.
All right, thank you for sticking with us to the end. I hope you guys have some good questions for the panel. I'm going to start off by asking a few questions of my own, and then we'll open it up for you guys to come up and ask questions. So when you do so, please come stand over here by Tom form a line against this wall, and we'll get to you each in the order in which you line up. All right, so folks, you've got a microphone right here. Feel free to pass that around. It probably needs to be turned on. There's a little switch. And I'm going to throw out a couple questions that may or may not be relevant to you. We've got a pretty diverse panel here. So this is part of our space business track. As Tom was talking about at the beginning of this session, that's what the Center for Space Commerce and Finance is focused on. So I do want to address this to those of you who have a business that has something to do with this agricultural technology. And let's talk about your business plan. What is your business model? Who are your customers? And where do you see, the kind of future of the company from a business perspective when you look at these systems? Jeff?
Okay, so you had a few different questions there. First, I would say that when I was in the Air Force, I had the opportunity to work on the Moon, Mars, and Beyond systems engineering plan. And one of the key things there is I came to the realization of a quote that I heard yesterday in one of the speakers, no bucks, no Buck Rogers. And I tweeted that last night and got some interesting response on it. But I think the general idea is whatever plans we came up with have to clearly show economical return on anything that we're doing as far as space travel. The romantic view of space and discovery for bettering our society is sadly not the reality of politics that we live in. Because of that, I think any space technology really has to show a clear return on investment here on Earth first, in my opinion, because that's where the politicians and the moneymakers and everybody else is going to see their tangible return. I wish it wasn't that case, but my experience so far has been we have to do something here on Earth to get through our current palm cycle so that we can actually have money and do things. To that end, our business model is truly, it's derived for Earth first, which is generate the technology, get the technology out there, support through services, try to redistribute the food system, and then take that and scale it to space. So Earth first, space second type of approach.
Our efforts are all based on grant money from NASA or NSF. We don't really have a business plan, but we do have some technology transfer that, with our outreach efforts, that working with a group in Algeria, refugees called the Sahrawi, and we've taken some hydroponic technology and helped those guys out, and also trying to work with a group called the Nubiats up on the North Slope in Alaska with my prior polar greenhouse expertise. So, but yeah, we're basically grant funded.
So a lot of people were asking about Mars City Design, if it's nonprofit or for-profit. We actually have a Mars City Foundation. So the nonprofit accepts grants and donation, and it's focused on the educational side and mentorship program, workshops. And the competition itself is under Mars City Design, which is for profit, which profit is going towards the nonprofits. So it's kind of both nonprofit. And in Mars City Design, it's like the new type of incubator, I guess. We are really calling in and select the best teams we want to work with in the future to build the habitat, the prototypes, and of course, like from every year when we select the winners, some of them will develop into a startup, and so we are assisting them like a consultant, and we connect people with the experts in each focus.
Well, what we've identified is that there are definite limits to the supply chain. So what we're trying to do is to meet those limits, where there's anywhere that is isolated, that has limited access to water and land. So the fact that we're a turnkey system that can go into areas that are not traditionally developable is the maximizer for our business model.
So I can speak to two businesses, one being Blue House, which is the design, build, control environment agriculture firm. So we will design and then contract to build greenhouses or vertical farms for our customers. We really specialize in urban environments, so we could do schools, universities, research centers, high-end retail, or somewhere that wants to have like a greenhouse vertical farm concept as part of like a showroom kind of feel, as well as farmers or the cannabis industry as well is a big customer of ours. For Huxley, it's somewhat of a similar story. That's the plant system we were talking about, the augmented reality and machine vision AI system that we were discussing earlier. And Huxley's customers right now are seed companies to date, which is to look at the help them work with genetics to look at that. So they partner with some European seed companies and are examining their technology and seeing how their different breeds are doing. I think that can really expand into education, into research applications, and to helping the farmers themselves.
Great. Okay, so Jeff and Bart, both of you in your discussions talked about the coming food crisis for humanity and how we're really bearing down on this serious issue. You guys both talked about democratizing the food supply chain. Of course, that's only going to work if your systems are scalable, easy to manufacture, repeatable results, consistency over time, and the ability to kind of rapidly deploy your systems. What is the biggest hindrance? What are you currently, what challenges are you having with that scalability, and what do you think the timeline is until you get to that sort of scaling?
Well, we started our work in our office in an aquarium, so scalability is certainly possible. And now we have an 80-foot by 40-foot building. I would say the biggest challenge, and kind of back to my breadboarding comment, is things either exist at an academic and experimental level, or they exist at a large farm or large operation level. The small family of 4 unit type of technology does not exist out there today. And that's where we're kind of figuring out the things that are missing. Certainly shelving and water production and pumps and cabling and all that are things that's not a scalability issue. But technology such as the digester, that is a scaling issue. And those are the types of things where we need to find the intermediate sizes to help us get there. Sensors are another key one. Automation, the Huxley stuff is freaking amazing. But in order to enable something like Huxley and AI, such as Huxley, I assume it's machine learning, that you do need to have sensor data. We've collected gigabytes worth of data, but sensors have to be reliable, and reliable sensors cost anywhere from $500 to a few $1,000s. And that's another area where scalability has to be addressed from what we've experienced.
Great. Bart, did you have
Just what would already be obvious, we're such in the infancy of all of this that so much has to be learned through trial and error. And there's so much data of people that are accomplishing great projects out there, but it still requires you to get your hands in the mud and figure out what's going to work and what's not going to work. And that's the biggest constraint. I would actually say to everything is, all of us having to Frankenstein our way through this and figure out, how to create an end product that can be, put in a McDonald's bag and give it to the public.
So, talking a little bit, just kind of switching focus now to more of the space stuff. What's the biggest technology hurdle between where you are now and getting a system like this to work in space? What are you concerned about from a technical perspective that's going to make space more difficult than here on Earth?
I can
number one is power. Everything is about power. Reliable, easily affordable, achievable power that's clean. Nuclear power is certainly the number one thing for off-planet operations, but every single calculation, assuming you get a fully closed-loop system, especially if you're going with more of the indoor growing versus greenhouse that Andrew spoke about earlier, everything comes down to power. You completely 100% depend on power, and without something that's affordable, that is our number one hurdle, and I think it's going to be the hurdle to stop people from adopting technologies that you have at Eden as well as what we're trying to work on. We can't take it where we give them food, but we drive up their electrical bill to $1,000 per month because of all the controlled systems that we have. And it's like, hey, look at my $500 head of lettuce here. It's way cool. So power is a big one, and I would say materials. Just being able to hear, I remember taking materials, and the folks that are making real breakthroughs in materials are probably going to be a key area. The right type of materials that are light, but rigid, and inflatables are great, but that they can withstand micromediates. That's going to be a big deal.
I agree with Jeff. It's power. At South Pole Station, a gallon of diesel fuel, because the generators run by diesel out there, is $25 a gallon. And then, we figure it's maybe $25, $50 a pound for produce. But the NSF feels it's well spent money because crew morale and things like that are real important. And so, yeah, it's energy. If you got energy and you have water, then you can do anything.
So, beside all that, since what we're doing is building the infrastructure, so I think the difficulty for us is that we cannot really test how it works in microgravity unless we send it somewhere or somebody come up with, creating the microgravity chamber. But I actually have a question, or can I ask the question now? Because, power, sometimes I wonder, nature has its own intelligence to deal with what is missing. So if we have to save power or there is no power, there are other type of plants that can grow without it, or can we now at our lifetime with all the genetic modification technology modify those plants to do that?
Well, there's a couple different questions here to answer. I think for the challenge of extrapolating growing here on Earth to growing on space, I would say it's fully closing the loops, right? So that we have a system that is totally self-sustaining. I think right now hydroponics, relies on a nutrient source, and where are the nutrients coming from? Our phosphorus comes from Morocco or China or Syria right now, and that's the phosphorus that we're using in our nutrients to grow here in the United States, right? So we talked a little bit about aquaponics potentially closing those loops, but I still think there are other loops to close, especially when you try and get more exotic plants in there. And then when we talk about power, I definitely agree that's a huge issue, and perhaps certain crops could use less power. The one that comes to mind for me is fungus. Right? We can grow mushrooms in darker environments. The issue being there, of course, is that mushrooms breathe in oxygen and exhale CO2. So that's a little bit of a struggle there to then balance that with the rest of your system. That fungus is an amazing kingdom. There's the three kingdoms: there's animals, there's plants, and then there's fungi. And I think they have a lot of really amazing biological and evolutionary strategies that we could tap into. But I don't know if those strategies are necessarily the best for space. Maybe if there's a way to genetically engineer the mushroom to exhale oxygen.
I think one of the biggest concerns I have is supplying the the baseline inputs into the system. So, until today, one of the problems we've been really looking at Eden is how to supply fish food. How do you get the fish food without having, industrial civilization to get fish pellets from? And there are some alternatives, and even some that were suggested to me today. But so far, I don't know about the one that you suggested, but they've used like grass carp and fed the fish, grass, but it has a direct effect on the taste and the quality of the end product. So, for me, it's trying to figure out the prime input in the system, which is what do you feed the fish to get them to
Black soldier fly. Black soldier fly larva is just the workhorse of sustainability. You can make them into fish treats, they'll love them. Basically, you can take any organic material. It could be a hamburger bun, it could be meat, it could be all these different things that you can't traditionally compost. And if you use black soldier flies, they will eat it, they will reproduce that. Their larva will be basically pure protein, which you can feed to the fish. And they're just a workhorse for sustainability. And one strategy I would definitely use to close the loop in space would be to incorporate insects.
That's good, thank you.
I don't know. It makes me a little concerned. Lack of insects was one of the reasons I wanted to go to space. All right, my last question, and then we'll open it up to the audience. So if y'all want to come get in line. So one of the things that we've talked about a bit today is hydroponics versus aquaponics, and having the fish in the system helping to close the loop. That's fantastic. One of the things we also know is that things with bones don't typically do well in lower gravity environments. So have you guys thought about any ways to address the way that fish may or may not grow or be able to reproduce in a lower gravity or a no gravity environment?
So, yes, we have. That was something I was really interested in my research, and what I came across was in Japan in the 1800s, they actually used eels in their aquaculture. And there have been numerous studies from NASA of eels thriving in space. So essentially our solution was to replace the fish with eels.
Which don't have bones, for those of you who didn't know that.
Yeah.
Snails. All this similar.
Great. If you have a question, come stand up over here, please.
Okay. We have audience questions. Start with you, sir.
Good afternoon. I've been working a lot on some of the aspects of hydroponics and farming in space. One thing I haven't been able to answer to any degree, and I'm a physicist, so I do things from a fundamental basis. But the thing I can't figure out, a thing I can't figure out really is how much labor is required to produce the food for one person.
Well, on one of our chambers, we mounted on load cells, and Lane, our grad student, calculated that it only took 45 minutes a week inside the actual chamber to provide the labor for growing crops in there. But we have that data in our paper that we put out. That we track the labor on that. So if you want to, go to our website at Controlled Environment Ag Center at U of A, that paper's there, and it's got the labor numbers.
There you go. He had an answer. Who knew?
On that same line, I'd say for us, I mean, the 4 families of 4, but also with the microgreens, I think for which you're spending on average 4 hours a day out there right now without full automation in place, to actually manage it. So 1 person, 4 hours a day gives you 4 families of 4 plus the microgreens going out for revenue. I would say that's not too high.
Well, definitely with Huxley, the goal is to make the labor more efficient. and also in some ways to be a precursor towards fully automated systems. There are definitely other strategies for automation. We see in the vertical farming field strategies where lots of conveyor belts or pulleys, moving systems. I'm always hesitant when I see these kinds of systems designs. Lots of moving parts means lots of potential failure points, and that's probably only exacerbated in space. That said, I have seen some fully automated systems which have not so many moving parts and some really ingenious designs towards how they move about the plants in a plant-to-human system. So there are definitely ways to improve the efficiencies of labor with automation. Even here in Los Angeles, there's a prototype vertical farm that's fully automated and has a very innovative strategy to it. So, but I think I talked about it a little bit in the panel that I did with the 3 larger scale vertical farms. Labor was the main issue they all attributed to their failures, in just that it was spending too much time. They didn't optimize their processes. They didn't think through their workflow. They didn't have efficient ergonomics. I think that's one issue that's probably a challenge in shipping containers, is you want to get as much yield and space as you can for that form factor. Yeah. And you got to think about the ergonomics of your farmer. Is your farmer tall enough to reach the top of the shipping container, or are they going to hurt their back reaching down towards the bottom? And so ergonomics, process flow, automation, these are all very important considerations to getting labor where it needs to be.
Well, and a note to where it all goes back to energy. You know, how much energy are the people that are actually interfacing with the equipment, especially in space, and not electrical energy, like human energy. How many calories are they going to burn to produce the calories they're going to replace? But the only way we're going to figure that out is through trial and error and through process.
Another thing is, like on a Mars mission, there's going to be some humanoid robots going along, and I envision that the astronauts, which is probably the most costly labor known to mankind, that the only reason that they'll be in the greenhouse is if they want to be in the greenhouse for recreation purposes. That hopefully everything else will be done by a humanoid robot.
Yeah, so I wouldn't worry about fish versus eels because they basically live in a zero G environment anyway. It's like they're in the NBL, so that's what they are. That's their life. The only vertebrate that lives in the sea that has to worry about is a whale, and it's been thought that they deal with it by breaching because their bones become weak, just like our bones become weak in a microgravity environment. We have countermeasures, multiple countermeasures, and whales' countermeasures may be that they just go up and then create this gigantic force, which is how they keep their skeleton like that. The other question I had to do with, we're in an environment now that is mostly meat eaters. But as you all noticed, the incursion of vegetarians and veganism is great. I'm a vegan myself. I eat vegan stuff. It's so much easier to find anywhere and everywhere. And as time goes on, more and more people are going to be in that milieu. So, and it has benefit for life extension and multiple other things. So, have you given any consideration for the shift in nutrition for what you'll be growing? As you model this up, because it's a different farm, obviously, for one thing versus another.
When it comes to the life pod, we're making it customizable, so it's really going to be the end user will make the decision, because depending on what environment, who they're trying to feed, we want the client to determine what they want. So even though we're putting a packaged system together, there will be versatility for the end product for them to choose what they want.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a vegetarian as well. I have been for just about my entire life. So I definitely think, growing plants is something that obviously we've spent a lot of time talking about, a little bit of time about growing fish as well. And we saw in the video, your cute video, that boy was feeding some hens in a chicken coop. And so I definitely think that we're going to need protein in space. I've seen vertical farming for root vegetables. I talked about that a little bit earlier. But I think other things like micro-ranching insects is going to be an incredibly efficient way to grow food. And I'm not sure what your feeling is towards insects on the ethical spectrum or on the sustainability spectrum, but they have a just tremendous amount of potential. And
roach milk.
Yeah.
You know some of that roach milk.
You know, if it's sustainable and it's ethical, then why not? That's my opinion. So I think if we could do some micro ranching, I think that would be very efficient. And if that doesn't sit well with you, then using that micro ranching to create protein for larger scale ranching like fish or chickens.
Also, one other note. When it comes to the scales of the system and what you're trying to get out of it, there's a lot of variability, and the more energy you put into fish harvesting, dramatically plant production goes down. So, you know, the systems that actually produce the most amount of harvest are the ones that are harvesting the least amount of fish.
Our efforts are pretty much guided by the baseline value assumption document, the VVAD that NASA puts out. And headquarters has pretty much said that it's not going to be a vegetarian diet in space, so we don't have any, we just follow what they say.
For ours, one of the key things we want to do is mission-based deployment of these systems on Earth. So cultural acceptance of the dietary needs that the system can produce is a key one. So different types of fish or aquaculture based on the location that you're going to, meaning warm water versus cold water type of things, giant freshwater prawns for things down that are warmer, or tilapia, which I think tastes horrible, but are culturally acceptable to other places. And they eat a lot of algae. Those are all good, but also the plants themselves. A big part of trying to help people on this planet is just cultural acceptance of the help that's coming. So we're just trying to make the system similar. You know, customers define the requirements, we just give them the tools.
You had a response.
I have a response also. I've done a lot of modeling of these things, and by my models, it looks like a vegan diet will take about 40% more growing area, and power than a omnivorous diet. And that's really just because people don't eat tomato stems and leaves and roots, but goats do, and chickens and fish and things. So that's all.
Let me just add to that comment. If you look at the amount of water, the amount of power to grow tomatoes versus a hamburger, it's staggeringly different in the favor of vegetarian stuff. I can give you the data I have right here if you want to talk about it.
No, it's free. The vegetation is free. You don't. My point was, if you don't feed your vegetation to something, then you have to burn it to regenerate the CO2 and water that you need to feed for the next crop. So you're going to have to consume it in some way. Why not consume it with animals? That's absolutely what you want.
Well, let me make a comment. I think all debate aside, you know, what you showed with the plant, I really think that's the future of these systems, is actually figuring out how to take them even outside of the footprint of what they're actually doing and plug them into a multitude of systems that creates a larger environment, that you get larger economy of scale. And I think the further we get along in that, and I think space development will actually lead to a lot of that, because it's going to force that issue, it's going to force that question and force that adaptability.
What about rabbits? What do you guys think of rabbits? I saw a thing in one of the early Mars Society conferences there, and the guys promoting that idea. Because rabbits, you know, they eat your veg, and they breed like rabbits, and apparently the meat's kind of tasty for those who are into it, and you do a lot of the fur, and you know, rabbit fur is like really highly prized. So, yes, exactly.
Are there systems to recover the CO2?
Hold on.
Okay. Rabbits or any type of living animal, how you integrate it in the system would be really, really important. And the number one reason for that is food safety. Letting any animals come into our system, for example, because we are going and selling things to people, is an absolute no-no.
That is 100% no food certification agency on the planet will allow you to bring live animals into a growing facility without significant amount of control. That would be is absolutely cost prohibitive without any doubt. But having other things, I mean, if you could come up with a separate location for it that was separate from the food itself, that would certainly be viable. But integrated into the system where things are like, hey, the chickens are running around next to your food. It's cool on our ranch. We have chickens, you know, we have mules, we have all that running around. We have cows and all that. I mean, a full working ranch. But if you're going to actually put it in a place where lots of people are exposed to it for food safety purposes, you're going to have to do some form of containment.
Well, I was misquoted in Business Insider magazine, you know, saying I advocated eating mealworms and silkworms, but you know, the Japanese, JAXA space agency and the Chinese lunar palace effort and stuff, they do take silkworms and turn them into a protein powder and get, you know, protein that way. But I'm all for having chicken in between me and the worms.
Without beating a dead horse, what it all comes back to, and where the impetus of where this technology has come from, is in utilizing the waste products of one system to supply another system. The more efficient we get in society and space with plugging in different aspects of our production systems so that we're taking that waste, and instead of all the nitrogen that's being dumped in the oceans, if we were instead recapping that back into another system that could benefit from it, now not only are we not harming the planet, we're having a much more efficient system. That's where all of this goes.
Yeah, I mean, to the issue of plant waste, I definitely think there are other waste streams that you could use them for besides animal agriculture. I think the biodigesters is being one, another being you know, composting. You bring up permaculture, you bring worms up there and start to create some soil that you could use. So I think there are other uses for that organic matter besides feeding them to animals, but feeding it to animals could be a use as well.
Okay, so you guys are talking a lot about aquaponics and hydroponics, which, you know, makes a whole lot of sense here on Earth. But when you go to places like the Moon or Mars, where water is a much more stringent resource that we have to use, why aren't you guys using farming techniques such as aeroponics? I've seen numbers that have aeroponics using 40% less water than hydroponics. So I was just curious as to the reasons as to why we weren't developing aeroponics for compost.
The fish are the primary driver of the system, and they need water to live. That's if you want to supply protein, then you have to have some kind of animal matter, and so fish or eels become the engine of the system. If it becomes solely a water issue, then you just don't utilize them. You take them out of the system and you develop a different system.
Some issues I've seen with aeroponics is the clogging of the nozzles. So for those of you who don't know, aeroponics is basically where you use the nutrient-filled mist to flow on the root zone of the plants. And nozzles, they get mineral buildup, sometimes they get biologic buildup in them, and if you're doing it that at scale, it's a lot of nozzles to replace. It's certainly an issue that you can overcome with good process optimization. If you're constantly cleaning those nozzles, or you have a routine for that, or perhaps some robot or some other systems for cleaning your nozzles. So I think aeroponics has a lot of potential. I know a lot of people who grow aeroponically with very good strategies, very good results, very high yields, good tasting produce. So it's a good point, and I definitely think it's worth exploring for space applications, but only with a thoughtful eye and lots of practice here on Earth.
I think I would echo the same, even with, well, you have to remember water is living water. You're not pumping around like an industrial water, so whether you're putting nutrients in it, such as in hydroponics to get what you need, where you have mineralization being a key challenge, or if it's in aquaponics where you have the fish waste that you're moving around, that water isn't just sterile water. and it has a bunch of issues that you have to deal with. For us, we just got done having to purge all the pipes because of the buildup that occurs in them. And they're not huge pipes, so you get a reduced pump flow. And reduced pump flow means your plants start to die, and your plants start to die, and you start to freak out, and you get yelled at because you're spending too much time on something else. So it's those little things, like Andrew was talking about, that the maintenance of the system would be a key reason why I mean, I've researched it, I'm aware of it, but the maintenance of it alone scares me.
Well, in microgravity, it doesn't work very well because you fog up the inside of your habitat if you have a leak or something like that. But on the lunar surface, you've got 1/6 gravity, so if you also have a leak around the stem or something like that, you can have free water floating around. And with all the electronic gear, they get pretty excited about having water escaping from your growing system. So, it's the complexity of the system that keeps people from employing it more.
You guys are out. I just want to get Howard here real quick. He has troubles standing for long periods of time. You two were not. We have an existing piece of real estate in space, and it has between 3 and 6 people in it at a time. And they're starving for vegetables, fresh vegetables, and they're really starving for the sight of greenery. They're deprived of nature in fairly hideous ways. So if you were to be given a contract to, let's say, fill a Bigelow module or add any kind of module that you wanted to the ISS that would provide a combination of fresh vegetables and the sight of greenery, a park, a tiny park, what would you recommend?
As far as type of vegetable or type of greenery or like type of technology?
The type of technology, what would the envelope look like? I mean, would a Bigelow module do? Would you need something else? What would you need to give these guys and women the greens both to eat and to see?
Well, the Russians have had the WADA system for quite a few years on the Russian side of the space station. And Ray just set up the veggie system with Orbitech that is a larger system. They've had little, Orbitech had made little boxes that went in the express racks that they've been testing, like.
So that's nanoracks?
What's that?
Nanoracks?
Yeah, something like that, but I just learned a couple days ago, somebody said they saw a Bigelow unit in Orbitech. So there's things going on, and the beam unit may end up being have plants in it.
That would be terrific.
Yeah.
I think at the end of the day is really to also know that, only humans actually think about having farms in space. Like, it's really not natural, that's why it's very difficult. Again, the idea of reverse engineering or reverse knowledge is to understand, like, extreme environment will demand us to eat extreme food. And what we have on Earth, I must say, so far, like everything from resveratrol to spirulina, all these things that actually, we don't have it in a regular meal unless you add supplement, and it's only lately we have that. But can we first think about that before we decide, which vegetable will survive or not? Because then when we know, we will do everything so that those type of vegetables or plants can grow. It's not the other way around. I don't know.
No, I would totally echo that. You want to, it comes back to the energy question. So you want to maximize whatever you're growing up there so that you're getting the most output for your input. So I would just say we would analyze what are the best plants growing in space and make a diet out of that.
Well, it seems to me your shipping containers are a model or a module for the ISS, easily adapted. So if you were going to put up the ideal shipping container in space and you knew you both had to entertain the astronauts and you had to feed them, what would you put up there?
I would do a variety. I mean, you start with leafy greens, but then you move past that into tomatoes, cucumbers, peppers, baseline so that you have the best variability of our vegetables. That's what I would do.
And what's given the fact that there's a tremendous amount of intense artificial agriculture going on to make cannabis even more effective than it already is it
we got to put one of those up there too. The astronauts need to have a good time.
Well, it seems to me that you can adapt some of their technologies for space.
Well, the interesting thing is a little known fact is a lot of this technology has come out of the cannabis industry. I can remember being a teenager in the late 90s and picking up a High Times for educational purposes and looking in it and seeing this space-age, state-of-the-art growing, because that's what High Times did. They would put, growing. And even at 19, I was looking at that one day and I said, I wonder what would happen if you put tomatoes in that thing.
Yes.
And so pretty much in the 90s, growers in Colorado and California started experimenting in home systems, and instead of doing marijuana, they started growing vegetables, and they discovered, wow, I can get 5-10 times the growth, the yield from doing this kind of system. So there's definitely a relationship there.
Right. Well, I'd like to recommend that we take the Bigelow module and we garden and breed it. Is that possible?
Yeah.
Yeah, amazing foibles, definitely.
Yeah, I'm sorry in that we had someone else who was invited for this session today who's actually is from the 420 community. He's actually going to make the case for growing industrial hemp on Mars as a crop, as a cash crop, because there's so many things you can do with the plant itself. Well, I know which people are already doing it. So, anyway, these last two guys, and we're going to have to call it a day.
What's your position on chemicals used for ripening, like plant hormones and ripening chemicals? And also, what about capital plants like fruit trees and large capital plants?
Well, up at Ames, they were experimenting with growing plums. And the way NASA is growing plums is they just have a little stem about that long, and it has a couple of leaves on it, and it has a plum. And that it will produce a fruit, but that's how they've been doing it for real close quarters. But I want to make a comment about diets, though. From my personal experience, like being out South Pole, when it's minus 65 and you've been out working all day, you're not really looking for a salad. And potatoes are good. They're heavy, and you don't want a salad.
And also for a sustainability issue, I think it's smart to also think of, it's interesting to comment about the goat, because maybe we should think about the type of plants that is not only really rich in nutrients, like the beets, like we can eat the whole thing, like roots, plants, it's all good. It's like what French would say, like everything in a pig is like edible and it's delicious. So plants have that too, the type of plants we can eat everything.
I also think, to address your question, it really comes down to what kind of system you're doing and where you're coming from with it. So, if you're going to use chemicals, or you're going to use fish pellets, you're assuming that you have direct access to a supply chain that can at least either regularly or at some point do drops to you, or you're trying to build a system that you can perpetuate itself with only itself. So it really, you can go in either direction, but it's just about what type of system you're trying to accomplish.
Just the other day, my friend and I were talking about using dandelion roots to grow rubber, and I've seen there's CRISPR trials for this type of thing, where you can genetically alter the plants to grow certain things you need, and I think that, to me, makes a lot of sense in the context of space, right? If you need rubber, maybe you could go to your geneticist or your farmer, or maybe have a joint consultation with both of them at the same time and say, hey, can we make a plant that's going to grow me some rubber, because I need that for this space mission that I have to do, or for this mining equipment, or for the tires of my autonomous robots. And so I definitely think that it makes sense. I don't necessarily see any ethical issues with doing this type of work in space. I think the ethical issue would be just letting the astronauts deal with the elements that they're faced with that are going to be extremely just extreme and possibly lethal. So my feeling towards your question about using chemical compounds, hormone regulators, CRISPR, genetics in the context of space, I think it makes a lot of sense. When you talk about here in the context of on Earth, that's a whole other conversation, which I think is a little bit beyond the scope of this discussion.
Okay, we've got one last question.
And it's really short. Earlier there was some mention of using fiber optics to pipe in light to the greenhouse. Is there any practical limit on how long those fiber optic cables can be to do that?
They all have advantages and disadvantages. Like if you use an organic cable with plastic fibers in it, your transmission losses are really great. The fused silica cables, they're really good. The losses are low, but then you have indexing losses from the bundle having gaps in between the different, each of the fibers. And then if you use a liquid silica cable, that's the best, but they're very, very expensive. But the losses aren't too bad with the fused silica or the liquid crystal cables. You can go pretty far with those.
Well, my thought is that the mountains of eternal light might be not the best place to be sitting because they might be pretty darn hot. You might want to be some distance away from that, but still get the light.
You know, if you're covered with a meter of regolith on one of those peaks of eternal light, the astronauts were saying that it's from Apollo, we're getting temperatures of minus 30 degrees C around the equator and stuff. So I think it might be similar.
Perpetual sunlight might be a different matter. What sort of?
Yeah, it could be. It's hard to tell.
I played with the fiber optics for the small side of things, and the challenge, as you already pointed out, is the cost, the affordability of it, with all the different connectors and everything you need to have to be able to move the light effectively. I was looking at a maximum of 100 feet distance, and I did some testing with it. I made my own little rig, nothing like what you did at ASU, but the conclusion very quickly is not commercially viable for the size of system that we're going after. LEDs are still the way to go, but I want them on the plasma.
Yeah, I was going to say plasma.
Well, you know, the Himawari system that we use is actually from, you know, it was designed in Japan to bring light into buildings because of lawsuits that if you build a building in front of another building in Japan, then you're liable. So this was a way of satisfying the owner that's getting shaded, and it's an interesting system.